Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. Thank you for tuning in to Rainier Avenue Radio. I have a few announcements I'd like to make. We are having a Call to Conscious Black History Month Museum at our radio station headquarters, the old Columbia City Theater. It is an amazing museum. It's all about local Black history. Please take some time and take your family and friends to go down and take a little tour. It runs through the whole month. It's at 4916 Rainier Avenue South. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Columbia City Theater, we will have the Total Experience Gospel Choir, and that is a live event. So come experience that with us. And we are broadcasting tonight the Metro League Girls Basketball Championships between Lakeside and Garfield, and then the Metro Boys Basketball Championships at 8 p.m. between Garfield and O'Day. So join us in cheering the kids on. This is the You Can Make a Difference show, and I'm your host, Mac McGregor. What we do on the You Can Make a Difference show is we shine a spotlight on people that are doing positive things to make a difference in our world, in our communities. And today I am very privileged to have an amazing guest with us. I'm reversing the roles. He's actually interviewed me before, and he's allowing me the honor to reverse and get to interview him. He is a legend in media broadcasting and news broadcasting, Ross Reynolds. He loves conversation and learning. He has hosted for KUOW for 34 years. He's been in broadcasting. He's been the program director, news director, executive producer of community engagement, and a public event conveyor and moderator and interviewer. He has many awards. He's won the 2011 Public Radio News Directors, first place in the call-in category. He is also the UW's Communication Alumni in the Hall of Fame at the UW. He's also been a Humanities Washington speaker, and he's interviewed some giants in his day. We're very happy to be able to have Ross on the show. Welcome to the show, Ross.
Hey, Mac, it's an honor to be with you.
Well, thanks. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. Good to be seen.
Yes. So tell me, what is it that made you passionate about the news? First of all, because that's how you started, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, I started doing music radio shows in Worcester, Massachusetts at my college. And I got into news in kind of a backwards way. It was a volunteer position. And when I graduated from college, I worked for a hi-fi store, got fired from that job, worked for an import-export company. I exported turbines to India, didn't like that at all, quit that job. And I was kind of at loose ends, but this entire time after I graduated, I'd been volunteering at this radio station. So I just went to the folks at the radio station and I said, well, I'd really like to be able to work here. I kind of need a job. And they said, well, we don't have a job for you, but if you help to write this grant, they wanted to do a program about police and criminal justice in Worcester, Massachusetts. Maybe we'll get it and you'll be able to get a job from that. So I wrote the grant and put it in and didn't get it, but I think I proved my interest to the station people, and they hired me on to be a public affairs director at the station. And that's how I got started. And I immediately loved it. I loved interviewing. I loved learning about the news. And I just realized that my entire life I've had placed a lot of value on news and the importance of information. It's harder to hold to the importance of information these days when so little information ggets through sometimes. But that was kind of what got me started on it.
Yeah, we're in a different era, right? When I was growing up, a lot of folks trusted their newscasters, right, to bring them the truth, and we are. It's like, how do you navigate this kind of atmosphere we're in where, misinformation is just everywhere?
It's very difficult. And I think of some of the programs that I used to do that would be controversial programs. And could I even do them today on the radio? Because there'd be just a lot of questioning and doubt about it from both sides of the political spectrum, because we seem to be in a very intolerant era. I probably don't need to tell you that, but if people are not on board with something 100%, they're completely against it sometimes, and it's a very difficult environment to work in. And particularly if you're trying to do the kind of a show that I like to do, which was, hey, here's this interesting issue. Let's hear both sides of the issue. Let's open the phone lines and hear what you have to say about it, what you have to say about it, and kind of direct a positive conversation, which may not end with people agreeing, but at least letting them respect one another and understand another's viewpoint.
Right. We used to be able to debate subjects and still we could agree to disagree, and still respect one another. And now it seems to become very personal.
Very.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to definitely debate subjects, especially when you're talking about political subjects.
Sure. Anything in society and politics. And, there's, of course, a lot of reasons for that. I think social media has allowed there to be much more information out there. And so many people, for example, they don't listen as much to public radio. They might not be reading magazines as much. So that gap is filled by social media. And if anyone looks closely at what their social media feeds say, they should be extremely skeptical. However, many people are not particularly skeptical. Right.
You've also hosted many town halls in Seattle around hot topics, in the greater Seattle area. What was some of the moments of those that stick out to you?
Well, this was actually a radio show, but it kind of stuck out to me. You were asking some of my memorable moments before we did this interview. Yes. And I did a program called Living in a White City, and it was followed on a news story that you may have remembered, and this still may be the case, but it talked about Seattle as being the whitest city in America. I thought, that's interesting. Let's see what folks have to say about it. And opened the phone lines and immediately got an entire flood of calls. People who are not white talking about it, people who are white talking about it. And it was just really great to have people kind of expressing their viewpoints on it and not getting into a screaming match about it. And one of the things that kind of surprised me about it, I guess if I thought about it more, I would realize this. You might think there'd be antipathy between racial minorities and white people, and some of that was definitely expressed. But I realized, or relearned, I should say, that there's a lot of antipathy within ethnic groups also. And that made me remember my experience in Worcester, Massachusetts. We had a very strong Puerto Rican community in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I began to gather after a while from working with folks at the radio station, the Puerto Ricans felt as though they were looked down on by the Colombians and some other South American folks. So there's this misunderstanding and kind of anger at folks for no reason in all areas.
Right. It is always interesting to me to watch groups of people that are already marginalized that will marginalize one another.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it happens all the time.
And it's because we tend to stereotype. I think it's human nature we get a little bit of information and we apply that to the rest of the world, which we have to do. It's actually something we have to do. We can't come up with every new situation and try to figure it out. But however, that kind of gets super oversimplified and we stop paying attention to nuances, and everything has to be 100%, and anything that's 90% is wrong.
Yes. It is interesting that you bring up that topic about this being the whitest city. When I moved here in 2008, I moved here from the South, and that's one of my observations right away. Where are all the people of color? This is crazy. I lived in the North End at that time,
sure,
in the Greenwood area, and I hardly saw any people of color.
Yes. Well, it also depends on what neighborhood you're in these days. I mean, you can be
now. I'm in Beacon Hill, and it's very different. Yeah. So what came out of that discussion? I mean, did you gain any interesting knowledge out of that discussion?
There wasn't any kind of a breakthrough, but I guess the idea that your thoughts about antipathy between people of different races may not be as nuanced as they should be. There's other factors that are going on there. And just the fact that we could all talk about it. It was a conversation that I probably could not have in person because I didn't have access to the airwaves where anyone who was listening could pick up the phone and call. And with a little judicious work by the folks who answer the phone, we get in a really interesting mix of people. And the fun about doing a call-in program is you've got 10 lines and someone comes in and expresses an opinion about something, and the call screener can go, oh, this next caller has a different view on that. Or I could even put two people on at the same time and say, oh, here's another person who's calling in and they have a different view than you, person A, and encourage a conversation between the two of them. And that was really fun to do. You just felt as though you were creating a dialogue that wouldn't have been there unless you had done this thing.
Yeah, that's great. You have also interviewed some, big names. Brene Brown sticks out to me. I'm a huge fan of hers. You've interviewed Bo Diddley, Margaret Atwood. What, from those, I love interviewing people because I love to learn about people's story. And, so what sticks out to you from all the amazing folks you've been able to interview?
Oh, there are so many of them. It's asking me to choose my favorite child, but just a few of them that come to mind. And these might not be necessarily well-known people, but William Kennedy is an award-winning novelist, and he wrote novels about Albany, New York. Perhaps the best one was about two alcoholics who lived there, was called Ironweed. It was later made into a movie with Jack Nicholson. And he was, to my view, novelists are the ultimate artists because they create such amazing worlds just with the use of a pen or a keyboard. And I just think the power of a great novel is so amazing. So I kind of bow down to novelists. So talking to William Kennedy was really an incredible thing to do. Also, on the nonfiction front, Arlie Hochschild is a sociologist at Berkeley, and she wrote this amazing book before Trump got elected. She went to rural areas of Louisiana to talk to folks, a lot of white folks, a lot of different people from different races, and she wanted to find out from them why politically they aligned with certain people. And as the Trump movement got moving along, she wanted to ask them about that. And it was very interesting to me to hear what she said, because she went in as a sociologist. She was not being judgmental about it. A Berkeley sociologist in rural conservative areas of Louisiana, which seemed like it would be a tough road to hoe, but she said people were super friendly and nice to her about it. And she just provided you with kind of a clear understanding of the why people were feeling that way. And it's a lot of stuff I think we know better now that we've been a few years into it. People who feel disadvantaged, they felt as though minorities were getting a leg up, and they weren't getting a leg up. They felt as though they were being left behind. And when you hear those perspectives presented, you don't necessarily agree with them. There is something called white privilege.
Yes.
But you do understand why someone might have a different perspective on it. And just understanding another side, I think, gets us closer to the truth.
Oh yeah. And just being able to sit and have the conversation, right, is huge.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you've also been a Humanities Washington speaker, which I am this season as well.
Oh, congratulations. It's really fun, isn't it? Have you had any yet?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's great. I haven't had any yet. My first one that's booked is coming up in April, so I'm very excited about it.
Oh, I think you'll enjoy it. It's so fun to get out all around the state and talk to people about something you're passionate about.
Yes. So how you did a 2-year term on that? Is that
yeah?
correct?
It actually got extended a little bit because of COVID. So I think we ended up with 2.5 years.
Yeah. And tell us about your speech.
Well, the topic I was one that was near and dear to me. It was about the technology of audio, and it starts with radio and it went right to the present day with the internet, et cetera. So I got to talk about my passion of radio, and I got to talk about how new ways of technology have changed the way we're able to listen to things, and talk about some things that I really like a lot, and just kind of tell the history of car radios. And then at the end, of course, as you know, because you're one of the speakers, part of the goal is to encourage people to speak. So at the end, I would get people to talk about their radio experiences and what things do they remember hearing on the radio. And we just got into some really great discussions. One of my favorite things, though, was one of my presentations, a woman brought a radio with her. And I said, "Is that your radio?" She said, "No, this is a radio I had as a teenager. And I found another one in a thrift store and I had to buy it." So she wanted to bring it to show us her radio, which was really fun.
That is fun.
Yeah,
it is exciting getting to hear, because this takes us into some very small rural areas of the state, right? You get to really meet people with very different experiences.
Yes.
Yeah, which is lovely, right?
And people are, if you're in a smaller town where you don't have all the distractions of Seattle, these
Right.
little events become more important. They're more vested in it. And it's kind of more interesting to them. They'll come, they'll listen closely, they'll spend the time with it rather than looking at their phone or taking off to the next thing.
Yes, yes. So tell us, what are you doing in your retirement?
Well, I've been doing a little bit of freelance interviewing. I don't know if you're familiar with GeekWire. GeekWire is a really great tech news website. And they asked me if I would be willing to work on their podcasts. So we're working on their podcasts. And actually, this was one of my favorite interviews recently, which was I talked to a woman who wrote a book about working for Amazon for 12 years. And she discussed what it's like for a woman to work there for that amount of time, the kind of rough and tumble atmosphere there is in it. And that was really interesting to do. And I've got another one that's coming up in April. It'll be on stage at Town Hall. And I don't know too much about the woman who wrote this book about technology and rich people who've made money from technology. But there's a whole theme now of books and literature about the problems with billionaires. And I think we'll be getting into that and the problems of one person owning the amount of technology that some of these billionaires own. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. Otherwise, I mean, retirement is really great, Mac. I highly recommend it. Are you retired?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
I highly recommend it. I've been doing a lot of traveling and, I'm the kind of a person who ever since I was a kid, I'm happy curling up in a chair and reading a book all afternoon. So being able to do that anytime I want to. And I can only describe it as that kind of a little excitement or feeling you get before a weekend or before you're going on a trip when it's going to be your time. And you wake up in the morning when you're retired and that's like every day. So it's a great feeling.
Yes, I look forward to that. Yeah, that'll be very nice. Yes. Now, what about you writing a book? You have so many stories, I'm sure, to share from your experiences.
I've realized one thing about myself, Mac, and I'm not patient enough to sit down and write a book. I've realized that was the one thing about doing a daily radio show that was really great. I could work really hard on it. I could go in, do the interviews, and then it was over. Good, bad, or indifferent. Ideally, good more often than not. And then afterwards, I would just immediately get to work on the next program that was going. So I don't know if I started this way, but I'm at the point now where I don't have the focus and the energy to write an entire book. But I still get an opportunity to do these interviews for GeekWire, and so I'm really enjoying that.
Yes, well, you're right. I have published a book, and it does take a lot of time. Yes, and focus for sure. Yeah. So tell us. I would love to hear your thoughts. Speaking of the news cycle, about what's going on right now in our world. I mean, this is the craziest time I've ever seen or experienced politically and just globally as well. It's not just in the United States. It's like rights are rolling back and the right wing is rising all over the world, really. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts about where we are?
Well, it's the saying in the computer world, garbage in, garbage out. There's a lot of garbage going in if you scan the social media aspect. So maybe it's not that surprising that there's a lot of garbage coming out at the other end. And I know one of the things you asked me to think about was storytelling. Yes. And I think that storytelling is hailed these days as being kind of a wonderful way to get to authenticity and to change minds. But when I've thought about the kind of reputation that storytelling has these days, back before this era of the lionization of storytelling, when you told someone a story, that kind of meant that they were they might be like lying to you or selling you something that you didn't really want. Yeah. And I think about that a lot because storytelling is exalted as being a high form, but we have to remember that stories can be told by all kinds of people. That's and true. Stories that are authentic, that are actual factual things, can often leave out parts. The successful story for some reason appeals to someone, but that doesn't mean it's true. I mean, we can think of great stories that you and I have read that we want to sit up and go, this is amazing. This so analyzes this so well. We could talk about our favorite novels or our favorite stories, but think about the other stories that are being told that are just as authentic and real to others. So I kind of back away from this lionization of storytelling to journalism, because in journalism, you do want to tell a story, you do want to have a narrative, but you are not a good journalist if you're leaving out contrafactual information that doesn't kind of support a central thesis. And that's why journalists like those who write for the New Yorker and the Atlantic, oftentimes their stories are so nuanced that they're kind of pulling you in one direction, and then all of a sudden other facts come in and they're pushing you in the other direction. And that's kind of what we always try to do in public radio, is like, let you decide what's going on, present as many sides of the story as we possibly can, and then you make up, you determine what the actual story is. But one of the most successful storytellers of the moment is Donald Trump. He's telling a story that is amazingly convincing to large numbers of people. I mean, you could pick it apart and go, this is obviously isn't true, but that doesn't mean people don't believe it and don't really trust what's going on. So I guess I'm kind of always cautious about the perfectly formed story, and even the perfectly formed true story, you're going to knock off the edges of it, because to make a narrative compelling, you're going to leave out the things that don't make the narrative go forward. However, those things might actually create a more nuanced understanding of it. And so that's true. I think what's going on today is maybe there's too much lionization of storytelling and not enough kind of critical views of storytelling. And also, the old saw about consider the source. One of the most amazing things to me today about the information environment is how little regard people seem to have for where this information comes from. Yes. And of course, we're just citizens. I'm more of a citizen now, but so we can't do all of our own fact checking. But when something appears somewhere, you might want to pause for a second before you forward it to someone else or consider where it's coming from.
Yeah, you make a good point. I grew up with a grandfather he's my favorite storyteller of all time. But as a little kid, if we'd watch a Western, he would tell me great stories about how he taught all those guys to ride a horse and shoot a gun. They would be nothing if he didn't teach them that. And I mean, he made me laugh as a kid. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, you're right. Why aren't people questioning when they hear these great storytellers? Why don't they question more? Is this true? Right.
Right. And it's different if it's a relative or someone close to you, because you're going to be less skeptical because you love them. You're not going to be skeptical. And even in that case, we've all been tricked or fooled or thought about someone in one way and learned that another thing was going on. Human beings are not always honest, and sometimes when they get into storytelling mode, they're not telling the truth. Now, if it's grandpa kind of layering on a little bit more than he really did, that's one thing. But if it's someone who's like telling you to go demonstrate at the Capitol and put up a noose and threaten the vice president, that's another story.
It sure is. I mean, even though I was a kid, I knew he was telling me a story. I knew it wasn't true, but it was fun,
Yeah. Well, stories also are entertainment. I mean, we go to the movies just to be purely entertained, but even stories that are just to entertain us often contain messages that we're also absorbing. We not even know it, but we like the story so much, we're absorbing the underlying things in the message, in the story, which may not be truthful at all. And that's why storytelling is has such direct access to it. A good story is, in fact, if you're a salesperson, you want to tell a good story about the product. Right. If you're a politician, you want to tell a good story about the state of the public. So it's fascinating to me how it works and doesn't.
Yes, it's true. How do you think we got to this place, though, where people have a low tolerance for science, a low tolerance for the truth? I mean, they really seem to have a low tolerance for it. It's just interesting.
I think it's because our ideas are formed by our information environment, and that includes people we talk to or outlets that we get. And so many people now are just going online to learn things from social media, and they're not particularly critical about it. Now, we have to understand, as a journalist, my job was to spend all day checking out stuff and making sure it was right and doing it. And everyday folks don't have the opportunity to do that. And they've come to completely mistrust the mainstream media, which always kind of surprises me, because let's sit back for a moment. Yes, the New York Times has gotten stories grievously wrong before about the invasion of Iraq and others, but put their record of badly reported news against the record of others who are purportedly telling the truth. And it's sort of like there's no comparison. I mean, we all make mistakes and we all make faults. And I think a common mindset now is that once you've told me something that's not true, I don't believe anything you've said. Yeah. And, there are certainly things that changed during COVID about advice on masks, et cetera, and doing things. And as soon as the story changes, it's like, well, I can't trust you because that one thing you said was wrong. And it's difficult to balance all of that unless you take the time to do it. But it's kind of necessary if you really want to have a clearer view of the world.
Right. It's the cancel culture.
Yeah.
Basically idea of, yeah. And, especially it is very interesting with COVID because it was a novel virus and people forget what that means. We were learning as we were going. This is brand new. Yeah. Even the scientists were learning as we were going. So they did the best they could. Right.
Yes.
Let's talk about the benefit of public radio. You have a great experience with that.
Oh, here I go on a pledge drive. Well, public radio, you're a listener. I worked there for 34 years, and I got to say, I got enormous value out of that just personally. And I always felt very satisfied and happy I was able to work in that medium because there are, even today, even more so, there are fewer and fewer sources that set out to interrogate the truth, to interrogate stories, and to give you nuanced things. And I think in public radio, we always did that. And people who are working in public radio still do that. Now, that's not to say they're always right or everything about them is perfect, but just hold up their record of truth against a lot of the other sources that people might be paying attention to. And it's kind of obvious. And the great thing about public radio, too, is that it's free. I mean, you can just listen to it anytime you want to. Now I sure sound like a pledge drive, but we do ask you once a year to please support it with your financial support, not just for you, but for the fact that if it's out there, maybe someone else is going to tune into it. I had such a good time when we were doing pledge drives because often I would meet people in person or listen to people and they would talk about how they had listened to public radio for a long time, but they were just out of school and they didn't have any money and now they had a better job and now they wanted to contribute. And I thought that is so great because those who contributed before kind of made it available for them so they could listen to it and appreciate it. And then you get a chance to give back to it. And that was always a great feeling.
Yes. Support public radio, folks. And we're a nonprofit right here. And this is a community-based radio station. And, we do. We get voices from all over the community, so that's a great thing to be a part of. Ross, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making a difference in the world and for all you've done and contributed.
Thank you, Mac. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Have a great day. All right, everyone. Don't forget, you can make a difference every day.